take mine away. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. We gather in a week when our nation faces yet another act of mass violence, and in a week in which millions of our fellow Americans are begging for help to put their lives back together after one of the worst series of natural disasters the United States has ever seen. Before we begin, I'd like us to take a moment of silence for our fellow Americans who are suffering this week. In some ways, the events of the last week make tonight seem trivial, but in other ways, it signals why what we are doing here tonight is so important. Each of the candidates on this stage is asking voters to trust him or her to help guide government when addressing situations like those we are currently facing, as well as the concerns we have as we go about our daily lives. I'm Jessica Prody. I'm a member of Right the Power. I'm also an educator, a resident of Canton, and a citizen concerned with the direction that politics are currently going in. I want to thank Hugh C. Williams High School for allowing us to host this important event. Thank you to the many constituents of the 21st District who have volunteered their time to bring us all together. Event organizers, our greeters, our ushers, Alexander for doing the sound and lights. Thanks. And thank you to the candidates for being here tonight. Thank you also to Joe Blum for filming. I do want to make sure that people are aware that this event is being video recorded and will be uploaded to social media following the event. We're doing this so that the event can be viewed by citizens across the district. Before we go further, I'd like to ask that everyone turn off or mute their cell phones. Give you a minute to make sure that's the case. All right. I'd also like to point out the exits are here if you need to get out, and bathrooms are just down the hall to your right when you exit the theater. As you know, we're here to talk about issues that are important to us and to our district. The open forum is a cornerstone of American democracy and one of the few opportunities we have as citizens to hear directly from elected officials or politicians seeking our support. The individuals on this stage are here because they want to represent you in Congress. Elise Stefanik, our current representative, was invited to the event, but her scheduler told us she was needed in Washington, D.C. For those candidates who could be here tonight, this is an opportunity to answer your questions that were submitted by citizens across the district prior to this event. And they were chosen by our moderator, Matt Manier, to represent various demographics of the district's citizens and to cover various policy areas. Candidates will have 2 minutes each to introduce themselves to you. Following their introductions, our moderator will begin posing questions. Each candidate will be able to provide a 1-minute response to each question. I've been asked by the media to remind the candidates to please speak into the microphone, which I'm trying to do as well. So you'll probably get a couple of reminders throughout the night. When 15 seconds are remaining on that 1-minute answer, Ben Landry, our timekeeper, right here, will raise his hand. At 1 minute, he will signal to Matt, our moderator, who will verbally stop you from continuing your answer. No, so you might, Ben, you might need to go in the center there. No. Yeah. Okay. So before I hand things over to Matt, can I ask everyone in the audience who is able to stand to please stand for a moment? Thank you for coming tonight. Please look around. We are standing among our friends and our neighbors. We are standing among our fellow citizens. If you don't know the people standing next to you, please take a moment just to introduce yourselves.
Hi, Jess.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
Good to see you.
It's good to meet you. I've never met you before.
Thank you for humoring me. You can be seated, please.
Too friendly.
Yep, too friendly. All of you are here tonight participating in some of the most important work of our democracy. You are participating in the process of interviewing candidates seeking the job of representing you. As we undertake this interview process this evening, we ask that you withhold your applause and expressions of agreement or disagreement. We have many candidates on the stage, and expressions from the crowd will cut into the limited time we have to hear from them. We promise to provide an opportunity at the end of the forum for you to show your appreciation for the candidates who took the time to be here tonight. On a final note before we begin, following tonight's forum, if you have yet to register to vote or would like to change your party affiliation, please fill out a voter registration form located on the tables outside the auditorium. The deadline for voter registration for the November 7th general election is October 13th, so just around the corner. Thank you, everyone. Now let's get started. I will have you turn your attention to Matt.
You can clap for her. Good evening. Thank you all so much for being here. I will allow you to break the clapping rule as well to introduce and thank all of our awesome candidates. Thank you all for running. Please welcome them. And with that, no more clapping. All right, so I have a variety of questions that are covering a wide array of issues. Most of these were based on questions that were submitted to me by constituents from the area. What we're going to do is we're going to start off on the far left and move to the right, and then we're going to just shuffle over one each time. So Emily is going to start first on the second question, and then Dan's going to start on the third, and so on. So each of you is going to have a minute to answer. So for the first question, and, oh, sorry. Wow. There's a lot of people here. This is like crazy. Okay, so we are going to start with 2-minute introductions for each person, and we will begin with Mr. Boyajian. So I believe that would be your cue. So
Thank you.
2
Thank
minutes.
you.
Whoa. Please speak into the microphone.
I will.
Just not that loud.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. You know, the way that I grew up was not that dissimilar than pretty much any young man in our part of New York. My grandfather, he was a farmer, and my father was largely cut from the same cloth. He was one of these strict guys that he'd wake you up at 6 a.m. on Saturday and say, get your butt out of bed, and you're going out and you're working. And we spent all our time outside. But when we finished our work, he'd say, good, you did it. And he'd get us in the car, me and my friends, and we'd go down to the Battenkill River, and we'd fish. And it was just such a wonderful, wonderful way to grow up. And I've continued that lifestyle to this day. I got my fishing rod in the car. I'm going to go hit the Saranac River on the way back home tomorrow morning. But, you know, a lot of those fishing buddies that I had growing up, as I got older, they've left the region. And they loved it here, but they had to leave really just because there were no jobs. There was no opportunity. And that really concerns me. And it's something that hasn't been going on for a few years. This has been going on for 40, 50 years. We need somebody that's committed to this region and changing that trajectory, because that is the wrong trajectory. I'm committed to this region. I chose to stay here because I love this region. I love the people. I love the communities. I love the way of life. But we need somebody that's going to change that trajectory and knows how to get things done. And I'm somebody that's going to be able to do that because I'm the only person on this stage that's worked in every branch of government. I've worked in federal government and Congress as a legislative aide at a time when we got a ton done in 2009. I worked in state government in the Attorney General's office in the Environmental Protection Bureau. And I currently work in local government as a town attorney for several towns throughout upstate New York, where I'm working on issues that if Elise Stefanik were doing her job, they wouldn't be falling on the local municipalities. But I believe in getting things done. That's what I want to do for the region, and I plan on just getting things done from the day one. Thank you.
All right, and moving to Emily Martz.
My name is Emily Martz. I live in Saranac Lake. I've worked there for 7 years. I own property, I pay taxes, and my family is there. I'm running for Congress because I care about the people of our district, our country, and the integrity of our democracy. My tie to this district is my experience, which is a current and relevant track record of directly helping the working families across our district by expanding businesses, creating jobs, and improving our downtowns. It's a current and relevant track record of listening to communities, learning what they need and their visions, and creating partnerships to help bring the resources that are needed to fulfill the needs and the visions, like the chainsaw carver in Lowville, who I helped expand his market base to the point that he can barely keep up with business. I'm running for Congress because my values are the values of our district. We work hard, we're as generous as we can be, and we build bridges with our neighbors. I've spent many a weekend with church members working to make sure that our most vulnerable community members have a dry and a safe roof over their head. 2 days after the election, I approached a neighbor whom I know voted differently than I did, and I asked him to help me understand his needs and his values, and it turns out they're much like mine. I created an activist group, and together with Right the Power, we brought together different groups from around the district. We brought together members of the Democratic Party because we know that in order to get this district the leadership that we need, the leadership that is focused on the needs of working families in rural America, we need to come together to raise our voices together. And I am running because I am someone who has built her entire life upon listening, learning, and leading people to help them get the resources that they need to build the lives that we want to live. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kim.
Good evening. My name is Ron Kim. Thank you for having me tonight. The best way to know a little bit about me, I think, is to know where I came from. And I came to Glens Falls when I was in second grade. My family moved there, went to the Glens Falls Public High School, graduated. After that, went to Colgate University to get a bachelor's. Went on to the University of Chicago to get a master's in public policy. After that, worked for about 3 years for the mayor of New York City in their Office of Management and Budget. After that, I took a leave and went off to law school, and for a few years worked in corporate America in New York and Boston. After that, I decided to come home because I always knew that having been raised in upstate New York, I wanted to give that to my children. So I came back here. That's about 20 years ago. And the first job I had was with the Environmental Federation of New York, worked with a number of organizations to basically educate and fundraise around environmental issues. One of the groups was the Adirondack Council. After about 10 years doing that, I decided to go out on my own, start a small business, and practice law. Instead of working for corporate America or any company, I decided to represent people just like you. I did consumer protection work and also employment discrimination litigation. In addition, eventually I ran for city council in Saratoga Springs. I was a commissioner of public safety for 2 terms, ran the largest department in that city, and I'm now looking to run for Congress because I believe I'm the best qualified from my experiences, and I'm looking forward to sharing those experiences with you over the next 12 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Finley.
Good evening. I'm Russ Finley, and I live right on the hill behind the school. 30 years, 30 pounds, and a full head of hair ago, I was on the U.S. bobsled team for 7 years, and that really opened my eyes. I traveled the world. I traveled behind the wall. I've traveled Russia and Eastern Europe. I've seen socialism. I've been treated through my bobsled crashes in government-ran hospitals, and I know this is not the direction that we need to go. Now, moving forward, I'm a farmer. I've been a farmer for 20 years. My last day off was August 13th, 1998. I've ran my own real estate business for 23 years. And somewhat like Don, I have a lot of government experience, but my government experience is the same as everybody out here tonight. My government experience is the fact that I know what's wrong because I've been screwed by every level of government that is out there. We are dysfunctional from the bottom to the top. And this is the problem, and this is why I'm running for Congress. We can no longer afford to have a Congress with a 9 to 10% approval rating scoring a 95% reelection rate. We need ordinary common people that know the people, know the district, know what everybody's needs and wants are, and understand and are willing to listen, irregardless of political philosophies and background. I am not here tonight to be a congressman. I am here to be a representative. I am here to represent the people of the district. I am here to listen, and I am here to take our message to Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Krieg.
Hi, I'm Steve Krieg, and I came to this district in 1977 as a 19-year-old airman in the United States Air Force stationed at Plattsburgh Air Force Base. And I loved it here. I loved the district. I love to fish. I love the hike. I love the mountains, the rivers, the lakes. It's a beautiful place, and that's what made me want to stay here. I got my associate's degree from Clinton Community College while I was in the Air Force. The Air Force was kind enough to pay for that for me. I got my bachelor's degree at Plattsburgh State after leaving the Air Force, and the GI Bill was kind enough to pay for that for me. I went on to optometry school in Boston for 4 years, long enough to become a diehard Red Sox fan. My apologies to any Yankee fans out there. I know we can all be friends, even though we disagree on baseball. I married a local girl while I was at Plattsburgh State, somebody from Lake Placid. So we wanted to come back to the district. We did come back to the district. Originally came to Messina. Lived in Messina for a couple of years, worked as an optometrist. Went contra dancing in Potsdam, met a good friend of mine who has come here with me tonight, Dr. Adam Jaffe, another optometrist, and his wife Brenda. So it's nice that I was able to come and see them. After Messina, we moved to Plattsburgh and have lived in Plattsburgh since 1991, raised 2 daughters who are now grown up and off on their own. So why am I running for Congress? I'm done. I guess I'm out of time, but I will get to that eventually.
Thank you, Mr. Krieg. Ms. Wilson.
Thank you. Katie Wilson. Almost 20% of children in our district live below the poverty line. And the average income per capita here in the North Country is $27,000 a year. These are the realities that we face. But we are told the representation in government, especially at the federal level, is reserved for the wealthy, for the well-connected, and for the powerful. We are basically told that we're disqualified, we're unqualified to represent ourselves. So I ask you, what kind of representation is that? I could tell you about my childhood. I could tell you about how incredible my kids are, and they are amazing. I could tell you how hard I've worked to get to this point in the race, but that's not important right now. What's important right now is taking back control of the House, is taking back control of our government, and is taking back control of our future. As I've driven around the district, I've spoken to Stefanik supporter after Stefanik supporter, and they tell me time and time again that they voted for a strong young woman who promised to give the North Country an independent voice. But right now, we are paying the salary of someone who she's so out of touch, she doesn't even understand why we're upset. She and her boss, Paul Ryan, they have betrayed us. They answer to the high dollar donors who get them elected, and she, in fact, voted to hand our economy right back over to the bankers who ruined it. So I ask you right now, I'm telling you right now, that I am that strong, young, independent voice that the North Country asked for twice already and didn't get, and that we need now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
So every summer growing up, I spent at least 1 week at a camp in Hebron Center that was run by the Presbyterian Church from 3rd grade to 12th grade. And the summers I spent there had a great influence on me, not just spiritually, but in my personal development. In the summer of 2011, the Presbyterian Church in Albany decided they were going to try and sell that camp. And this inspired me to take action. I went from being one of the youngest elders in the Presbyterian Church to being one of the youngest commissioners to presbytery. I got myself absorbed in parliamentary procedure and actually found I was good at it and liked it. I know, it's weird. But I fought to try and protect that camp. We didn't succeed, but we were able to get an amendment that said that the proceeds from that camp would serve the same mission that the camp did. Later on that same summer, I was entering my senior year at RPI, studying biochemistry, and as one is entering their senior year of college, trying to figure out what it was I was going to do with my life. I was watching Real Time with Bill Maher, and Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson happened to be a guest. And he said something that forever changed the course of my life. He said, you take a look at Congress, and what do you see? You see lawyer, 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 businessman, businesswoman, lawyer, lawyer, businessman, businessman, lawyer, lawyer. Where are the scientists? Where are the engineers? Where's the rest of life? So with that experience in parliamentary process and that moment of inspiration, I knew what it was I was going to try and do. And I spent the next 6 years of my life trying to find a way to have an influence. It's been a journey full of some successes and indeed a lot of failures. I've been an activist in this district for the last 3 years, and no one has knocked on more doors and talked to more voters in this district one-on-one than I have. And that is the basis of my qualification. And at the end of that long journey, I have the honor to sit here on this stage with these other candidates in front of you all and say that my name is Patrick Nelson, and I'm a candidate for the United States House of Representatives. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Ms. Cobb.
First, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for coming out tonight and taking time out of your lives to be here. And also, I'd like to thank Write the Power for organizing tonight. This summer, we've been talking about hurricanes. We've been talking about North Korean missile testing. We've been talking about Charlottesville and the resurgence of neo-Nazis. And unfortunately, this week, we're talking again about guns and gun safety. We're reminded that there is a need for compassionate and competent government, that our representatives need to work with us and for us, and that we are, in fact, tonight having the right conversation at the right time. I'm Tedra Cobb, and I'm running for Congress because New York 21 isn't just an area on a map for me. It's my home. I was a student here 30 years ago. I decided to stay here, raise my children here. I've worked on many not-for-profit boards. I ran a community health agency. I also have had my own business. But most importantly, I ran for public office. I was elected to the county legislature, where I served 4 years. I beat an incumbent. I ran a second time unopposed. When I ran, I said I would listen to people and I would work for them, and I believe that's why I was unopposed the second time, because I lived those values. I'm wondering how many people I can sort of see. How many people work in healthcare? Raise your hand. How many people work in education? How many people work in tourism or the environment or own a small business? Well, that's why we're here tonight. There's not just issues. Healthcare and the environment and education are sources of economic activity that must be protected in order to flourish. I'm running for Congress to do just that.
Well, thank you very much for all those statements. So, as I prematurely stated, we will now be moving into questions. Each candidate will have 1 minute. We will be starting with Mr. Boyajian. So for the first question, I'd like to know, we have many Republicans and Democrats here. why have you chosen to affiliate yourself with that particular party, and what does being a member of that party mean to you? You have 1 minute, starting with Mr. Boyajian.
That's a great question. You know, I'm somebody that came from, it's interesting. My family is, my mother is an independent, my father is a Republican, I'm a Democrat. We have a lot of the same values, and we talk about this with party selection sometimes. And I say to them time and time again, if I'm going to pick a party, I'm going to pick the one, and no party's perfect, but I'm going to always go for the one that enacts programs that uplift people in need, because that is really what the goal of government is to level the playing field, to fulfill the American dream. And I think the values of the Democratic Party, though they don't always function perfectly, but the policies that we support and the values that we promote are always focused on uplifting people in need.
Go right ahead.
I registered as a Democrat, probably the same reason many of us registered with our party, because my parents were Democrats. As I lived my life, as I lived my values, as I moved through my careers, lived in cities, lived in small 2,000-person towns, I've reflected and I've lived out my values of earning what I need and believing that with success comes the responsibility to give back by giving a hand up. And I believe that the true principles of the Democratic Party are about helping people live the lives that they want to lead by giving them the opportunities to work hard regardless of their background or the circumstances in which they were born into. And for those who are unable to take care of themselves, we help them. It's about the people. It's not about the profits.
Thank you.
Hi, I grew up as a Republican, and some of you who are old enough might remember that the New York State Republican Party was called the Rockefeller wing of the Republican Party. It no longer exists. It's not even close. And I think in 1990, I left because the values that I thought the Republican Party stood for were not there then, and not to even say now. I believe that basically the Republican Party ought to stand for freedom, but freedom requires this nation to come together on some very fundamental values, such as health care for all. You can't be free without having health care for all. So that's why I left, and I'm never turned back.
Thank you.
I like movie quotes. Everybody like a good movie quote? Ned Beatty in the movie Shooter. There's no Democrats. There's no Republicans. There's no Sunnis. There's no Shiites. There's only haves and have-nots. And the side you want to be on, Gunny, is the side that gets you paid. Frankly, honestly, I'm disgusted by both parties. They're at war with each other. They're the kings and queens and bishops down in Washington, D.C., and they're using us all as pawns. While I am a registered Republican, what I am is a conservative. I believe in low taxes, I believe in free markets, and I believe in people and businesses keeping their money in their pockets. And that is why, while I am a Republican, I am here tonight to tell you I'm a conservative.
So political parties I find very frustrating. I think if I look at my own beliefs, I don't fit into one neatly. Probably most people would have to agree with that. I'll get back to why I'm running for Congress. And the main reason now is we have a president who thinks it's okay to talk about using nuclear weapons to kill millions of people as if he were talking about tearing down a garage. We have a president that thinks it's okay to talk about using nuclear weapons to kill millions of people as if he were talking about tearing down a garage.
I registered as a Democrat when I was 18, and it was because it felt like a party that was about empowerment. And I think that's been echoed a little bit here, but we can work harder to empower one another. And I'm running right now as a Democrat because I believe we can get back to a place where this party stands for something. And this party really does lift people up. And this party allows our government to provide the framework that we need to live meaningful, fruitful lives and pursue happiness.
I believe the two-party system has largely failed the American people. As a former delegate for Senator Bernie Sanders, I'm intimately aware of the dysfunction within the Democratic Party. However, there are two major parties that control the major decisions that affect our lives, and we face an existential crisis in climate change that we do not have time to fully reform the political system to start taking action on. So when it comes time for me to choose which party to align myself with, the science of greenhouse gases and the influence of CO2 on our environment has been understood since the 19th century. We have two major parties. One is willing to listen to the scientific consensus, make progress, and move us towards a future where we can protect our way of life, and the other would stick its head in the sand and not listen to the scientists and greatly endanger the legacy of our species. So I'm proud to be a Democrat.
Well, I'm glad to follow that. I chose to be a Democrat on purpose because of my values, because I value education, I value equality, I value freedom of association, and I value protecting our environment. I value those things, listening to other people, being respectful to other people. I value community service. I don't believe that just Democrats value these things, but I chose to be a Democrat because of those things. I don't think that those are soft. I don't think that Democrats are soft. In fact, I think it's tough to be a Democrat. It's tough to fight for those things every single day. I did it as a legislator. I worked with other people who were Republicans because I think many other people share those values. So I hope that I get to do that with other people.
Thank you, everyone. So the next question pertains to campaign finance. A common concern that is raised is that politicians are being bought or paid for by wealthy donors who finance their campaigns. Do you see a need for campaign finance reform? And if so, what do you think it would look like? If no, why? Beginning with Ms. Bartz.
There absolutely needs to be campaign finance reform. Somebody who can donate $10,000 should not have a stronger voice in their district or in a neighboring district than the person who can donate $25. We need to recognize that corporations are not people. We need to recognize through reform legislation that the increasing amounts of money in our campaigns and in our political system is destabilizing our political system. We will need a lot of money to fund this race, and I promise you that from wherever my money comes, I will be shaping policy according to the needs of our district as opposed to the interests of those who provide me with the finances. Thank you.
Thank you.
To fund this campaign, the successful candidate is going to have to raise significant amounts of money. The current congressperson already has about $1 million. And to do that, it's going to be necessary to get the support not only of the district, but also people outside the district. But that's the important part. It's the people that matter. I won't seek any contributions from any corporations or special interests. I'll be looking basically from the support from you all and from people like yourselves outside that are intent on flipping Congress to a Democratic column this year. Should we reform? Absolutely. Citizens United is an abomination, and I will support any kind of constitutional amendment that would come across through Congress to do that.
As Ron said, we're all up against it. You ask anybody on this dais, when we've contacted our respective parties, the very first word, they didn't care who we were, what we were about, track record, life goals, life achievements. The very first question was, what's your capability of raising money? It's the unfortunate evil of the system right now. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to reach out to large donors. I will reach out. This is going to be a very costly race. But the one thing that I know is, irregardless of where that money comes from, I'm not asking for it from the struggling people of this district, but I'm going to pay it back in spades by properly representing you. It's the unfortunate evil that we deal with in the system right now, and it needs to be changed. But we're all up against the same scenario right now.
I'm 60 years old. I've been hearing about campaign finance reform since I began voting at age 18, and have not seen much in the way of help in that area. And I doubt that I ever will. It's nice to talk about, but it's just not going to happen. What would help is term limits in Congress. If we can get people that want to get in there and do something and then get out, I think we have a chance to stop the system from becoming a club for congressmen and senators instead of a body that, or two bodies that serve the American people.
I think it's quite simple what we need to do with campaign finance. We need to start with overturning Citizens United, because corporations are not people and their money should not be their speech. And then we need to create a structure through the levels of office that cap the amount you can raise per office. I think that at the congressional level, $500,000 should be plenty. It's enough to pay the good union print shops and employ the consultants in the district and anywhere else you need to hire them from, but it's not enough to keep someone who actually fits their district from running and representing their people.
Our present campaign finance system is a cancer upon our politics, and it leads to a government full of people whose primary skill is that they're really effective telemarketers rather than political or thought leaders. And let me say this idea that congressional races cost $2 to $3 million is a myth perpetuated by people that get rich off of congressional campaigns. 70% of most congressional campaign budgets go to paid media to put TV ads out that you know nobody watches and don't persuade anybody. So why does all that money get spent on TV? Because everybody gets their cut. The media consultant gets their cut, the TV station gets its cut, and oftentimes the campaign manager gets their cut. This is driving up the cost of our elections, crowding out people that are good candidates, and leading to a really, really poor campaign style that serves corporate donors rather than the people. Our campaign leads by example. We should have publicly funded elections. We're funded at a grassroots level. Our average contribution is right around $40 with over 600 grassroots donors from hardworking people in this district, and that's how we choose to move forward at a grassroots level with volunteers and small dollar contributions.
I agree with many people on the stage. I agree with Katie that we should cap the amount that we have in the race or for each race. I believe that we should limit corporate donors. I believe that PACs should have full disclosure. The difficulty is you don't know who's putting up ads. I don't know who's putting up ads, and I think that that's absolutely wrong. I also believe in public funding. I think that that's an opportunity. So to me, we have a problem. There are many, we should have a discussion about the solution. I don't think I'm I don't think I'm naive, but I do think it's tough. I think it's tough because the reality is 90% of incumbents win. And why? Because they have the money. There's no incentive to change this.
I want to commend everybody here for acknowledging the need for campaign finance reform. All great ideas here today, and it's wonderful to see everybody largely on the same page. And I want to just tell you a story, because when I worked as a legislative aide, my boss, Michael McMahon, who's a great public servant, he was a community leader, but the amount of pressure he had on him on a daily basis as a congressman, not just running, but you're basically always running and campaigning. And do you know what frustrates me the most about that, and frustrated him, is it prevents you from doing the job. And that's a big part of why things don't get done. We need to reform the system because this is public service at its core. It's not politics. It should be about public service. But the way this system works now, there's too much of an emphasis on raising money, and it takes away from getting things done for our communities. And that's what's most upsetting to me.
Thank you very much. The next few questions are related to health issues in the country. What's your analysis of the Affordable Care Act and its strengths or its weaknesses and its effects on New York 21? I want you to focus specifically on your perspective on the bill itself, not proposed reforms. We're going to get to that later. For now, what are the pros and cons of the bill for this region? Thank you. Starting with Mr. Kim.
Well, I'm actually one of those people that self-funds, and so I'm in the individual market, and premiums are high. That's because I run my own business, and I think that we need to create more competition there, and that is one of the real problems with the ACA as it is now. And I think it's going to unfortunately get worse because our president wants to make this bill, well, the law fail. So I would argue at minimum that we need a public option that will make it more competitive. We need to release Medicare and Medicaid to actually negotiate with drug companies, and also that would make it more competitive.
I'm 52 years old, and I haven't had health insurance since I was in my early to mid-20s. 2 years ago, I fell, broke 2 ribs, and broke my nose. I set my nose with a YouTube video. So, trust me, I know what having health care means. But the problem with Obamacare is it's a self-imploding program designed to collapse in on itself and force us into single payer. And as I've said, as someone who had a severe burn in Germany and went to the hospital and had Bengay rubbed on his arm, I've seen what socialized medicine is. I've seen the waiting lines. I've seen what those hospitals are, and we can't do that. We have to start looking for a free market solution.
Obamacare has done a good job of increasing access. Our uninsured rate has gone from 16% to about 8%. The problem is it hasn't controlled the costs of health care, but that's something that just needs to be fixed. I'm an optometrist. I see people in healthcare setting every day, every work day, and at least a couple of times a month somebody will come in and I'll say, I'm sorry, I can't help you with glasses. You have cataracts, you need cataract surgery. I can't afford it. Don't you have insurance? Yeah, but my deductible is $2,000. I don't have $2,000 to pay for my... So I see that every day, or at least a couple times a month in my practice.
I think the Medicaid expansion was the biggest gift from the ACA because it helped cover people like myself and my kids. It also helped expand programs in school for occupational therapies and make sure that our elderly were getting the extra financing they needed to stay in nursing homes, and that home healthcare aides were, being bolstered. But I think that the biggest problem was landing delivering the burden of providing health care on small business employers. You know, I mean, I can't hire people to work for me largely because I can't afford these costs. So we need to remove that burden. And, you know, it's interesting when you were talking about, you know, the eye doctor and, say, the orthodontist. I mean, those are some big bills, and the ACA didn't, you know, there are times when I stay awake all night wondering what the heck I'm going to do when my kids need braces. I'll leave it at that.
So I think the major benefit is somewhere between 60 and 83,000 people in this district obtain health care coverage that didn't have it before. I'm one of them. One of the problems was, and I think it's encapsulated by a meme I saw, which is that if the ACA, or if Obamacare had been single-payer health care, the Republicans would have tried to repeal it with the ACA. This was the conservative free market approach to health care. It's not socialized medicine, it's a mandate system. Germany doesn't have a socialized healthcare system. Germany has a mandate system. The United Kingdom has a socialized healthcare system. I say this because you're going to be electing someone that will work on healthcare policy, and you need to elect somebody who knows what these words mean. That being said, one of the biggest problems with the Affordable Care Act is there was far too much influence from both the health insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry, and not enough influence from we the people. It's a wonder these two areas are making out like gangbusters out of this bill. It's time to move to Medicare for all. I'm out of time.
Well, I agree. The first thing is the problem with the ACA is that we cannot negotiate prescription drug prices. That started with Medicare, and it flowed over into the ACA, and that is a serious issue. The other problem is the mandating. The intention was to drive the cost down. The outcome has not been that. The other thing that is a problem is that the insurance companies, New York State, just now the insurance companies asked for a 30% increase and got it. The last thing I want to say is that the deductibles, the cost for it is still too high, and the deductibles are still too high, and people are not getting the primary care that they need. And they're going only when they have a crisis, and we can't afford that. It's ruining our economy.
I mean, it's obvious to me that providing coverage to 80,000 people in our community that didn't have coverage before is a huge benefit. But it's been a shock to the system in some ways, and I felt that shock. I remember when my plan changed after the switch to the Affordable Care Act. I had a $5,000 deductible, and I ended up having an emergency, and I had a $4,000 hospital bill. Right after the plan switched, I had to pay that. It took a year to pay that bill off. That's not a good situation. The Affordable Care Act has been good at extending coverage, but we need to treat it as a step, because health care is a right. It's not a privilege. It should be a right. So I think what we need to do next is we need to focus on allowing Medicare to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies, and we need to lower the entry age of Medicare. We need to use this as a step forward to providing coverage for everybody.
As for the benefits of the ACA, coverage has been expanded. Pre-existing conditions need to be covered. There are no caps and lifetime limits, and it's at least helped improve rural healthcare systems. The cons, on the other hand, is not everyone has coverage, and those small businesses who are LLCs know what I'm talking about. The costs of healthcare are still too high. I pay more for my health care and my health insurance than I can afford to put away for retirement. There's something wrong with that. The outcomes in our country are still too low. And our government is still not allowed to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies the way the governments in the rest of the developed world are allowed to negotiate, and we here in the United States are left holding the bag.
Thank you. So we started getting some hints at it, but the second question is about healthcare reform. So healthcare reform is obviously one of the most contentious issues that we've been facing over the past few months, and it also has enormous implications for District 21. What feasible changes do you anticipate would benefit people in New York 21 the most, improving access or quality of care for our constituents? So feasible changes in particular, beginning with Mr. Kim, Finley.
There's no quick fix. There's no easy solution. You're not going to fix this system. All I can say, and unfortunately tonight we're so limited in time to try and get into a lengthy discussion about this. The bottom line, yes, costs are high. Obamacare is a disaster. Government doesn't work. Government is inefficient. It's not going to work right. When I was in my mid-20s, I had a health insurance program with a $500 deductible through the Chamber of Commerce. I gave it up when it hit $550 a month. The costs keep escalating. So there's nobody here that is going to come up with a quick fix and instant solution. But I can tell you right now, government is not the way to go. Government has never done anything right or efficient.
I think Medicare for all would be great. I think it will be difficult to get there. As just an example, I'm on the school board in Plattsburgh. We buy our teachers very, very good health insurance. They do not have to pay much for it. Why would they want to change to Medicare and have to start paying taxes into a system that will end up costing them more, and probably their health insurance benefits will not be quite as good. What I think should be done now is keep Obamacare as it is, but add a public option. Both Medicare and Medicaid can sell plans to employers, to individuals, to meet their needs. And that should start to drive down costs and help move us along in the direction of care for all.
I believe that healthcare is a right, and right now, I'm a big fan of the Chris Murphy plan. I think that we offer a Medicare buy-in option on the open exchange. People start to realize how amazing it is. They tell their friends. All of a sudden, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where everyone's jumping in, and it's boom, like the quickest path, the most beautiful bridge to a Medicare for all system.
So the most efficient healthcare provider in the United States is Medicare, which has an overhead of 2%. The average free market private sector health insurance company is over 10%. So the myth that government can't do something efficiently is just that, a myth. The solution, which will not solve all our problems, and it's important to mention that we'll never stop reforming healthcare. This is something that is a very intimate situation where policy interacts with people, and that's why we need responsive, collaborative leaders that do town hall meetings and listen to constituents so that we can actually reform the system. There's a saying, the French love their healthcare system but change it all the time. Americans hate their healthcare system and never do anything about it. The solution that I support is S1804. It is the Sanders-Gillibrand Medicare for All bill that handles a transition well over 4 years, including a buy-in and lowering the Medicaid eligibility by 10 years every year. I think that that's a good start and a good model for a way forward. And the fact that every other country that uses more government intervention in their healthcare system spends like half of what we do per capita. We're at $10,000 per capita, and other countries are at $5,000, where they live longer and have better healthcare outcomes. I think government can do healthcare better than the free market.
My answer is simple. Healthcare should be portable and affordable. I really don't care if it's lowering the age of Medicare. Listen, I just got my AARP card. I would be happy for Medicare to go down to age 50. We need to be able to negotiate prescription drug prices. We could expand Medicaid and have other people buy into it, which I think some of these have said, folks have said here. We need incentives for preventative care, and people need health homes. The reason why outcomes are better in other countries is that people have health care, so they get health care. In other words, it's paid for so they get preventative health care and they don't end up going to the doctor. When I ran a health agency, we paid for someone to have a colonoscopy and he had 15 polyps. He would have died of colon cancer before he ever had health care. It's wrong, it needs to be changed.
I think the most preeminent thing that we need to focus on, and we are focused on it, is stopping these attacks against the Affordable Care Act. I've been to so many rallies recently, and the turnout is amazing. And we're getting it done, but we have to keep doing it because the Republicans are just going to keep going after it. How many attempts have there been? There have been 30-some-odd votes to take away our health care. And where's Stefanik been on this? I just went to a rally the other day outside her office. Nowhere to be seen. It's ridiculous. I think what we need to do moving forward, like I said, the goal is to provide coverage for everybody. And I believe that there's low-hanging fruit we could go after right now, that you get bipartisan support. The Senate just passed a wonderful bill last week that makes several improvements upon the Affordable Care Act, increasing and improving access to seniors. There's low-hanging fruit like that with respect to Medicare, lowering the age and allowing them to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies. We should go after that right now. It's a step in the right direction.
We need a healthcare system that puts the quality of people's care before the profits of the insurance companies. Everybody needs access to affordable quality healthcare. It's the right thing to do for people, and it's the right thing to do for our economy. We need to move towards a Medicare for all system, and let's take that first practical step of allowing everybody to purchase Medicare. That will help take the small businesses out of healthcare. It costs them too much, in many cases, as we've already heard tonight, to be able to provide health care for their employees, and often those really good employees go elsewhere and go outside of our district. We need a healthcare system that will fix that, that will make sure that our veterans have quick and easy access to affordable and quality health care, and we need to make sure that Planned Parenthood remains funded.
This question, to some extent, is a little bit academic because it depends on one thing, what happens in the 2018 election and perhaps the 2020 election. Because this is all about votes. We may be in a position to go for Medicare for all. We may not. It depends on what happens in the election. We may be just trying to save Obamacare, and that's the best we can get. So really, this question turns on what you do. Not only in this district, but what you do with all the people you know, and how you convince them that this is a right, that we can't be a free country unless we have health care for all. The details and the strategy of how we get there once we get the votes, that will happen, and I believe that I'd be a great representative to make sure we do our best job at that. But we need to convince America that this is a right.
Thank you. One final health-related question, this time public health. The opioid epidemic is a national crisis that has impacted rural communities all over the United States, including New York District 21. What steps do you think need to be taken to begin helping the communities and families that have been affected by the opiate crisis? Thank you. Who are we beginning with? Oh, Steve, thank you.
I've seen some studies on people that are opiate addicted, and the studies that kind of ring true to me show that it's not necessarily what people think it is. That people that get addicted to opiates tend to be disconnected from society. They're disconnected from people who can love them, that can help them to have a meaningful life. So the treatments I think that are most necessary are treatments that focus on that try to get people connected with other people to help them live a good life.
There are 7 detox beds in our entire district. That's 12 counties with 7 detox beds for opioid abuse. They're all here in St. Lawrence County. That's absurd. We could double the number of beds simply by putting more than one in a room. So there are programs coming down the pike, largely dependent upon funding. We need to make sure that funding's there. We need to also support peer-to-peer counseling groups, and we need to get rid of the stigma. We do need to lift each other up, but we must not forget that it's not just some forlorn, someone with problems that's not like us. It's your mom, and it's my sister, or whoever it's someone's daughter. It's, you know, these are people who are being prescribed addictions. So we need to make sure that these addictions aren't so profitable, and make sure that we all have access to all kinds of the health care that we need, including the mental health care.
So step one to dealing with this crisis is happening right now, and that's because we're talking about this topic in the public health section of the debate and not the criminal justice section of the debate. That is step number one. This is a medical crisis, not one of criminal justice. What we need to do is make funding available for treatment. I have a friend who was in recovery, was on Medicaid, was allowed 4 days of outpatient treatment. Couldn't even get into one of those detox beds. And I'll let you know that New York public health law doesn't allow you to have more than one detox bed in a room, because that's not something you go through with a roommate. It's a very violent process. Beyond that, we get funding for research or for treatment by ending the war on drugs, because all the money we have spent on the war on drugs over the past 40 years has resulted in higher addiction rates, higher rates of overdose, and has not solved the problem. This is a policy that plainly doesn't work. And we can also legalize cannabis. Studies have shown that states with legal cannabis have a 30% lower incidence of both opioid overdose and opioid overdose
Thank
and
you,
hospitalization.
There are several things. We need to deal with poverty. We need to address family poverty and the cycle that causes people helplessness. We need to deal with that. We need to also be realistic that this is a family issue, and we need to provide structure and support to families who are struggling, not only for opioid addiction, we're talking about that now, but for alcoholism, for other addictions. We're talking about opioids, but there are many addictions out there that we're not dealing with. We're not dealing with mental health issues and the support that people need. Many people self-medicate. These are all the kinds of things that are under public health, and you're right, we should be talking about this under public health, because mental health is a public health issue.
You know, I was just at a funeral last Wednesday for a good friend of mine whose son had just passed away from an opioid overdose. This was a good family. This was a family that, you know, the parents were involved. This wasn't a kid that was neglected or had gone, you know, and you hear one of these stories every month. And how did this happen? And when I really think about it, I think, well, this has really been the product of the pharmaceutical industry being out of control, pushing a product out that was dangerous. Countries. Our firm, which I'm proud to be a part of, we are actively going after these pharmaceutical companies, standing up for the rights of people that have been affected by these deceptive practices.
If we're going to fix this opioid crisis, we need to recognize, first and foremost, that this is a crisis that is affecting many, many families in our district, upper, lower, and middle income individuals. We need to stop thinking about it as a socioeconomic issue. It is a community issue. We could increase funding drastically for rehab programs and for beds if we considered it a national emergency. If we considered it and declared it an official emergency, we could get more funding for rehab, we could get more funding for beds. We need to hold insurance companies accountable. There are lower opioid pain medication that is less addictive on the market, but it costs more, and therefore insurance companies are choosing not to prescribe that over the lower priced, more highly addictive opioids. We also need to consider this a health issue and not a criminal justice issue. Stop taking people to jail,
Emily.
and stop.
That's time. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm old enough to remember when the tobacco companies sort of ruled the roost, and were sort of like the NRA and had all this power and influence. And if you remember, they kept saying, well, smoking doesn't cause cancer, and it's not addictive, and it's your fault, it's you all. And then all of a sudden, there were some key court cases that showed that they had made these products very addictive as heroin, and suddenly they had to pay up. And there were all sorts of programs out there for people to stop smoking. That will happen if the right Congress gets in and forces the drug companies to pay for these programs. I agree, we need more therapy, we need more beds, but they ought to pay. I believe in corporate responsibility, and this is where they have to be responsible.
One theme across the dais has reigned true. Candidate after candidate has said, more funding. You know who more funding is? You. It's more taxes. We're going to go after the pharmaceutical companies. We're going to sue them. Pharmaceuticals make a product. It's the doctors, it's the other people that are putting it out there. Go ahead, sue a pharmaceutical company. Get $50 million. Guess what's going to happen? Every single product that pharmaceutical company produces is going to have that big settlement figured into it. And guess who at the end of the day is going to pay for this? Us, you people, the taxpayers. It's a never-ending cycle. We have to work. I don't believe in a war on drugs, but heroin and opiates and stuff like that, we need border security to stop that garbage from coming into our country. I'm a farmer. I can't grow poppy here. It's grown elsewhere.
Are we allowed to respond?
Unfortunately, we are not allowing responses. You will have an option later on to sort of close if you want to address any points later on. Moving onward from the health-specific topics, now we're going to talk about a few things related to District 21, although all of these things have been. We live in a region characterized by long drives, low population density, and low incomes. This has meant keeping and attracting new jobs has been very challenging. Describe a specific proposal that you think would help to attract new employers or industries to this area. Beginning with Katie. Thank you.
Specifically, we need to address broadband. I think it really all comes down to infrastructure. When 30%, almost 30% of the area doesn't have access, that keeps young people from moving here and working remotely. It keeps young people from staying here who are already here. It keeps businesses like the one that I grew up on from being able to. We had a bed and breakfast, and people in the early 90s suddenly realized that they couldn't afford to stay with us, not because it was too expensive, because they couldn't work while they were on vacation. So this is a reality. It's something I hear over and over again from business owners. I also think we need to increase access to the rural airports. We need to make sure that that funding is also continued and expanded. And then we have these pathways for people to come, spend money, earn money, and our entire economy is bolstered.
Rural broadband is absolutely essential. We're also, with the advent of automation and artificial intelligence, we are moving into an economic era where more people will have to create a job than will be able to get a job. And I disagree with the point on the question that we need to attract employers. I look out on an entire audience of potential employers. Everyone is capable of building something for themselves, and indeed that's the world we're headed into. One of my misadventures brought me to Silicon Valley for a short period of time. And when I spoke with entrepreneurs out there were three main areas that helped or held people back from going in and starting a business. One of them was healthcare. Access, what if I get sick while I'm pursuing this? One was student debt. We need a student debt relief program for entrepreneurs. They exist for healthcare practitioners, they exist for civil servants, people in nonprofits. We need one for entrepreneurs. The other one was access to understanding and demystifying the business process. We need programs available at the county level that takes someone that knows how to make a product a service and puts them in touch with their resources to start a business themselves.
Thank you.
But we can grow this here.
I think there's a problem with the question, and that is that what is the one thing? There isn't one thing. There isn't one thing. We have a huge district. We need to marshal federal funds and be ready for those funds. We need to have a discussion about all of the opportunities that we have. We need to do workforce development. We need immigration policies. Right now, I just met with one of my former legislators and asked him, hey, how are things going? And he said, oh, the workforce is drying up. Those are farms that are here, that are unable to produce the milk that we need. That's our current economy. There isn't one thing. We need health care for everyone so that small businesses can grow, so that innovation can grow. We need to support our labor unions. We need to have shovel-ready projects so that when there's money, we're ready for it in this district and we can grow that infrastructure like broadband and cell coverage and roads and bridges. All of that contributes to our economy.
Infrastructure is a broad term, but I really think it's a multi-step process. It's infrastructure and it's education. The first thing I would do if I were elected is make sure I'm sitting on the right committees, and I think transportation infrastructure is a great committee to sit on. That's what the congressman I worked for sat on. He brought dollars back to the district. Why do I think that's a good idea? Because our infrastructure is deteriorating, it prevents commerce, and it's job creating in multiple stages. I want to see increased appropriations for the Tiger program and for the Community Development Block Grant program, because those go right to local communities. Now, when we don't invest in our infrastructure, do you know what happens? The burden falls on the local towns and villages, and that affects your taxes. And this all ties into jobs, but the federal government is falling short. We are so far behind in investing in infrastructure on a federal level. They haven't done a big infrastructure bill in over 20 years, and it is unacceptable.
Not only do we need broadband, but we need a representative in Congress who understands that there are a lot of communities in our district who are connected to the last mile of the state's 2020 broadband plan. And we're going to need someone in Congress who is going to fight to make sure that we get the federal monies that we need to connect that last mile. We also need help marketing our areas. A dollar put into marketing in a rural district, in our districts, is leveraged much more than in any other urban area, or any urban area in the country. And if we're going to attract people, we need to be able to advertise ourselves. So I took that question again at face value. But I agree with someone else here. We have the ability right here in this room in our communities to create jobs that can sustain families. We just need the resources to help individuals create those, and we need to look at the regulations that are sometimes stopping people from creating the businesses, because quite often the funding that's required and the regulations surrounding businesses are appropriate for large urban areas, but they are entirely inappropriate for rural areas, and that stifles our economic development.
As some of you know, we are now renegotiating NAFTA. And in part of NAFTA, of course, is our agreements and tariffs with Canada. The tariffs on milk, eggs, butter, some basic products that this region produces are something like 250%. So we really just don't trade those things to Canada. If I were congressperson, I'd be at the U.S. Trade Representative's office day and night, convincing them that this is something that could bring jobs to this area and that they need to attend to this. Because if we're opening up these things, and I sort of disagreed with it, let's now take lemons and turn it into lemonade. As to broadband, Governor, well, I can't talk anymore, sorry.
No, you had 15 seconds, Karen.
Okay, yeah, got it.
Oh, okay.
Government does not invest. Government spends your money. Every dollar that they spend, they have to go to you, to me, to us, to get more of it. The problem that we've got two problems in this state and in this district. One is Washington, D.C. not working on a good tax policy or putting a good tax plan together. And the other problem is Albany. And what's going on there? New York has spent itself into oblivion, has a $4 billion deficit, and they just keep raising taxes and raising taxes. And that's what we have to do. We have to work on a good incentivizing tax program in Washington, D.C., and we also have to get together all the New York congressional delegation, both Democrats and Republicans, and lean on Cuomo and say, quit spending us into oblivion.
Clinton County, we're actually doing pretty well with job creation and attracting employers. And I take credit for all of it. I have total responsibility. It was all my idea. And honestly, what I've noticed there and what I support is it's a collaborative effort of a lot of people who are working toward the same goals from different places. Colleges are doing it, the Chamber of Commerce, the municipalities are all working on it, and it's working. And from my point of view, I see kids, you know, they come to me for their glasses and their contact lenses, and I like kids, and I talk to kids, and I say, ask them what they're doing, and they're going to the new Institute for Advanced Manufacturing at Clinton Community College, and I can see the spark in their eyes, and I love to see that, and I'm happy that there are people in my area that are working hard on that, and well, I do what I can to support them.
Thank you. So the cost of higher education has continued to rise over the past few decades, leading many students graduating with perhaps insurmountable amounts of debt. What would you do to address the cost of higher education and help students manage that debt? Beginning with Mr. Nelson.
So happy to get this one. So happy to get this one first. So I am one of those people that has over $100,000 in student debt. Spent pursuing a science technology degree that I was told before I went would guarantee me a good paying job to pay back that debt. Shocker, the economy doesn't work that way anymore. We need to move towards the point that understands that, you know, it used to be that public funding was, I think, to a 4th or an 8th grade education. At some point in time, the powers that be decided that you needed a high school education to be competitive. And I think we've come to a point in time where some post-secondary education is necessary to compete in the modern economy. That could be a 4-year college, that could be a 2-year trade school. Higher education encompasses all of that, but we need to find a way to make that a universal right through public funding of, universal higher education at public schools. We also have to address the debt issue, and one of the ways we could do that is maybe not purchase the F-35 fighter that's going to cost us $1.5 trillion. That's enough money to forgive all the student debt. Now, maybe we don't need to do that, but we should forgive some of it and reduce the interest rates so that people can get out of that.
Thank you.
I would not have gone to college if I hadn't had financial aid. I have 9 adopted siblings, and my mother went to college when I was a sophomore. We need a 2% cap on student loans. The government should not be in the business of making money on loans. We also need subsidized loans so that students are not incurring interest while they are in school. So only subsidized loans, no unsubsidized loans. We also need to reinstate or increase the federal work study. Students should work. I worked all the way through college. How many of us worked in college? That's okay. We should work, but we should also be able to pay for college through that. And we also need public service loan forgiveness so that people who are working in hospitals, nursing, or public education have loan forgiveness. We do not have time to waste here. People should not be destined for financial burdens like poor Patrick here. Sorry, kid.
And poor me. I also was in the category of having over $100,000 of student debt after I finished law school. It's not right that school costs that much. And I always looked at the problem, especially when I was paying my loans, and saying this is wrong and we got to focus on fixing the cost of college tuition. But I've kind of shifted focus recently and said, well, why aren't kids coming out of high school trained for 21st century jobs? I think we need to have universal pre-K. Why aren't we investing on the front end when kids are young and easing the burden for their parents in this 21st century economy we're in? Why don't we promote BOCES programs more and vocational training more? We have a lot of good trade jobs in our region, but I don't think kids know that they can go down that path necessarily. That would solve some of the student loan issues, but it's just part of the problem, because part of the solution, because we also need to focus on the cost of education, because it's just wrong.
Two ways to address the loans. Obama started going down this road to reform the loan practices. Our good friend Betsy DeVos has started rolling those back. Student loans should be about education, not about profits. The other way to deal with the high loans is to make sure that everyone who's going to college should actually be going to college. There are plenty of other educational opportunities and paths for people to take, and we need to make vocational education sexy again. All the talk is about four-year college, and that needs to change. We need to advertise that unions have apprenticeship programs for electricians, for plumbers, for a lot of other skills, that when you get out of the apprentice program, you have health benefits and you have retirement benefits that will benefit you through the rest of your life. So it's a two-pronged, multi-pronged approach.
Unfortunately, this has become a mainstay of my consumer protection practice. About 8 years ago, I started to see people right out of college, grad school, chiropractors, all sorts of professionals who were coming in with these huge, unsustainable loan amounts. The highest, I think, was about $300,000. Last weekend, I actually attended a seminar in Delaware where a bunch of practitioners were discussing essentially how the student loan process, particularly private sector loans, they did the same thing they did with mortgages, folks. Wall Street made a ton of money on these things. And they fooled themselves. They were too clever. Some of these loans are now uncollectible, and I won't get into the legal theory, but they created these trusts to put these loans in, and they got a real problem. But there are a lot of solutions that can come forward out of this, because we are burying a generation, and we need to address this. And before my friend over here says that this is going to cost all of you, please come to me later and I'll disabuse you of that notion. Thank you.
You mean used to be friend. You know, I keep hearing about the cost of higher education, and I drive through Potsdam, or you drive through Clarkson, St. Lawrence, and I'll see about 10 kids walking down the street, and it just strikes me that there is 10 kids paying $65,000 a year to go to that school, and what is their sole purpose for the whole time that they're there? Those 10 together are paying the president of the university's salary. The cost of education has gotten out of hand with exorbitant salaries and some of these other things, and I look at a lot of these private universities that have millions and millions and millions in endowments, yet they still continue to raise their prices for an education that doesn't necessarily benefit. I mean, we had, like everybody, I do have to agree with a lot of people here. We need vocational training. We need vocational training in school. We need kids to come out of high school knowing how to change a tire and change their own oil.
Governor Cuomo, and Bernie Sanders both talk about tuition-free public colleges. It sounds good. You know, it's a nice program. I paid for my kids' colleges, and I was happy to do it. And now I'm done paying for it, and I can spend all my money running for Congress. So I guess I should go back and pay for somebody else's college. Anyway, what I think is that we should increase grant money, just in general, go back to the way it was before the Reagan administration changed it to where it was all done through loans, and start giving kids grant money and give it to kids who need it. My kids didn't really need it. Sure, I would complain and say, oh, this is really hard, but I did it. And I'm happy I did it, and I would do it for another 2 kids if I had another 2 kids.
I got 2 kids for you. I can tell you what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't let the Perkins loan program expire like Ms. Stefanik did, where she, in her usual fashion, sponsored a bill and then never did anything with it, never encouraged Paul Ryan to bring it to a vote. I mean, she's so close to this man, why couldn't she get that to come up for a vote? I would also certainly invest in the vocational training programs. Not everyone is meant to go on to, not everyone wants to. You know, who am I to decide what someone is or isn't meant to do? But I can assure you that there was a moment in my life where I wish that I had gone into a vocation, and not spend all the money that I did spend on the education that I didn't even end up finishing, because I knew if I stayed in another year and a half, I would be so in debt that I would never be able to dig myself out. Looking at my 40-year-old brother who was still piled in bills. I would also propose that we expand the public service forgiveness to include jobs like the DMV and in other municipalities, so that we could take it a little bit further.
And that's time. Thank you. So, starting with Ms. Cobb, what's your position on gun control? And are there any specific policies that you think need to be passed or removed?
Wow, this is quite the week to be talking about guns.
Into the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I said this is quite the week to be talking about guns. The reality in this district is that people hunt to feed their families, to put food on their tables. And so it's important for us in terms of our culture and our way of life. And also, we think about the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, and that we have a right to defend ourselves. But with rights come responsibilities. People who are mentally ill should not have access to weapons. We need to really have a serious discussion, which is not happening this week in Congress, about access to weapons that are military weapons. We need to really have this discussion. It's not happening. I don't want to wake up on another morning with now the next largest mass massacre because of the access that we have for weapons in this country.
I mean, how many times are we going to see these tragedies occurring? It's almost like we're becoming desensitized to it. And how gutless is Congress that they can't act? Right now, there's a bill that Stefanik refuses to take a stance on that would allow for silencers. It would ease up regulations for silencers. Now, I'm a hunter. I grew up, shooting clays in the yard and hunting with my family. I have no need for a silencer. I don't understand how Congress can at least take that action. It is unacceptable. But we need to stand up the same way we're standing up on the attacks on healthcare. We need to do it now with gun control, because if we don't, they're going to keep going down this path of doing nothing because they have no guts.
My thoughts and prayers are still with the victims and the families of the people in Las Vegas. There have been many, too many, of these mass shootings, and clearly it needs to stop now. Guns are a difficult issue in our district. We're a hunting culture. We use our guns to put food on the table, not to kill masses of innocent civilians. In Congress, I would pledge to uphold the Second Amendment and our right to bear arms. And I would also ask that we all come together to have serious discussion about the need for silencers and automatic weapons. We don't put food on our table with those.
None other than Antolin Scalia, who authored the Heller decision, which was really the first time that the Supreme Court dealt with gun rights, said that this is not an absolute right. And that's really true of all the rights in the Constitution. There is one specific recommendation beyond that I would support in Congress. It's the repeal of the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. Essentially, this was the gun lobby's immunity to any of the damages that go in these mass killings. This was passed in 2005 under the Bush administration, and it really wasn't noticed by really that many people. It was not as dramatic as a lot of the other gun issues. It basically says that you can't sue a gun manufacturer, a gun show, anyone, even if they're negligent. And we saw this actually in Connecticut. Some of the Connecticut families sued, and they ended up getting fined by the federal district court judge for their suits.
And that's time. Thank you.
First of all, I don't even believe this question should have never been asked. This was totally insensitive. And at this time, with bodies not even being cold, this question shouldn't even have been asked. That being said, this wasn't the largest mass murder. Wounded Knee, that was the largest one. Moving on, silencers. Silencers aren't silent. They cut the decibel level down. You can do the same thing by screwing an oil filter on the end of a gun. Are we going to ban oil filters? Next thing is, oh, we're going to sue the gun manufacturers. Are we going to sue car manufacturers and car dealers every time that somebody with a DWI gets in an accident? There is no gun show loophole. Every time somebody buys a gun at a gun show, they have to pass a background check. Every time somebody buys a gun at a gun shop, they have to pass a background check. And so there is so many misnomers out there attacking our Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment is not about hunting. It is about the right of the people to keep and bear arms that cannot be infringed.
And that's time. Thank you.
My father bought me my first shotgun when I was 14. Probably several years before that, bought me an air rifle. I have 6 guns in my gun cabinet locked at home, and I don't really want to see them taken away from me. But the time has come to start a conversation about this. We really need to come together as a country, as a people, and talk about this and say, hey, we realize everybody has their own concern, but what can we do to try to move forward, to try to stop these things from happening so frequently? And I'm willing to do that now as a gun owner, and I hope other people are too.
I'd also like to extend thoughts and prayers to the families in Las Vegas. I do want to say, though, that the people of the North Country are by and large responsible gun owners, and this is a question for someone who's looking to represent the North Country. So I'm a gun owner. I come from a family of gun owners. We've always been incredibly responsible, and that knowledge is actually what's kept our family responsible, because it's been passed down by people who understand how to use a rifle and who can share that knowledge safely with the next generation. However, I think we need to take a big, hard look at things like security. I mean, if we're going to talk about Vegas, how did he get in there with all those guns? I want to talk about security, and I want to talk about mental health, because it's not guns killing people, it's people with guns killing people.
Thoughts and prayers are not enough. I can think of no greater dishonor to the victims of the Las Vegas massacre than to continue to be silent and to not do everything in our power to prevent these atrocities from happening again. Now is the time to have this conversation. If not now, when? Let's start first with what we all agree on, which is the majority of Americans support expanding universal background checks at the federal level. The state of Nevada did not have background checks, and that is something that could be improved. But also, let's not repeat the mistakes of the SAFE Act, which was one group of people passing regulations onto another group of people that wasn't well thought out, that regulated firearms on a cosmetic basis rather than their capacity to do harm. I don't care what a weapon looks like. It depends on what it can do to cause damage, and Russ is right. Silencers don't work like they work in the movies, and this is a shiny object that is leading us down the hole where we won't be able to actually find common ground with the responsible gun owners of the North Country. We need to come together, united as the American people, and solve this problem.
Thank you. So climate change has been one of the hottest issues both facing the country but also the region, with some people arguing that it is a Chinese hoax and some people arguing that it is quite literally the greatest existential crisis facing humanity. What is your position on climate change, and how would you convince someone in District 21 of that position? Beginning with Mr. Boyajian. Yeah, I started with you, right? Yeah, so we're going back around.
This is an issue that I've been so focused on since I was young, because I was an environmental biology student, and then I went to forestry school for grad school. Before I worked in Congress as a legislative aide working on the cap and trade bill, I worked extensively on Waxman-Markey. And in the 10 years that have passed since that time, it's like we've gone 20 years backwards. I think there is how would I convince somebody? Look at the science. If they're not convinced by that, well, look at the events happening more frequently by the week. Look at the events of last month. I think we need to be focusing on mitigating the effects of climate change, but we also need to be preparing for the changes, and it relates to infrastructure as well. But I think it's common sense at this point, and if you don't get it, well, you're going to be seeing more and more of these severe events.
It's impossible to convince someone who doesn't want to be convinced. So let's keep the good teachers in our public schools, beginning in public education. As for the rest of people, we can't convince people with logic, but we can with their pocketbooks. So instead of trying to convince people with logic, let's create economic systems that de-incentivize dirty energy, that incentivize the use of clean energy and renewable energy. Let's do that by making sure that the subsidies and the grants that were put into place for the oil companies and the coal companies, they can be shifted, and make sure that they're applicable to all types of clean energy and renewable energy. Let's not do it piecemeal, and let's work to build into the cost of doing business the cost of polluting and creating climate change.
I worked 10 years for environmental organizations doing education in upstate New York. And one of the things that we found in doing a lot of that work was if you showed people how easy it was to save the environment, that's where sort of your carbon footprint came from, and how there were little things you could do that would make dramatic impacts. Now, we have to go further, and some of that's a little harder. I tend to agree with the but we, in those days, this is in the 90s, we weren't dealing with people who willfully did not want to recognize this. I mean, I heard a commentator once mention, there's only really one party that doesn't believe in climate change in the world, and that's the Republican Party in the United States. There really is only one party. So maybe we just can't, but there are things we can do.
Given that I'm the only one on the dais that has worked outside every day, all day for the last 20 years, I can tell you, climate does change every day.
Simmer, folks.
Yes, it does.
Please be respectful.
Emily, the stuff that you're proposing, I'm a farmer. $7,000 on every tractor that's sold to a farmer now because of emission control. 119 hurricanes have hit Miami in the last century. Houston's been flooded a bunch of times. We are in an ebb and flow. This always happens. This climate change stuff, I'm sorry, I don't go for it. And I'm not going to support it. And I'm glad we got out of the Paris Accord that was costing us billions of dollars every year and not doing anything to the real polluters, China and India.
I'm actually a little bit more optimistic about climate change in that if we can get this administration out of there and get them off the backs of the scientists that can work on this, I think it can be solved. I do trust the scientists to work on this and solve it. My problem, the thing that scares me much more than that, is nuclear weapons. Because nuclear weapons is a problem that's going to have to be solved by politicians. And I trust politicians much, much less than scientists.
This conversation is frustrating because there isn't, I mean, maybe with the exception of Russ, really anyone out there who doesn't believe in it. The markets show us that. The oil companies are investing in clean energy. We all know it's happening. There may be a guy in the White House saying that, you know, it's all of these crazy things, but the vast majority of people know what's going on, and you can follow the money and realize that. So the markets are already decentralizing themselves. And what we need to talk about now is resilience. This is a national security issue, and we need to make sure that we're prepared to deal with things like Houston so that we don't have people exposed to water that's toxic and potentially ready to blow up all around them. And we can contain these sites that are now vulnerable and on the coast.
So the nice thing about science is it's true whether or not you believe it. This is, I mean, not... Can I get that?
Simmer.
This is an issue of our economy. It's an issue of national security. I mean, one of the precipitating, not the only cause, but one of the causes of the crisis in Syria was a massive drought that was influenced by climate change. 2014 was the hottest year on record. 2015 was the hottest year on record. 2016 was the hottest year on record. We're waiting on 2017. Maybe it can do it with 4 in a row. We need to take heed and look at this as a serious adult issue, and we need to deploy renewable resources as quickly as humanly possible on the scale and magnitude of the Second World War, because we face no less of an existential crisis than we did in the 1930s and the 1940s. And oh, by the way, when we engaged the American economy like we did in the 30s and 40s, we had levels of economic growth that you would not believe. Over double-digit economic growth, full employment. This is the best thing we can do to help create jobs, and the North Country has a special role to play with a longer growing season. We're going to be feeding the Northeast with climate change, and we need to invest in our infrastructure and prepare to do it.
That's time. Thank you.
I agree. It's an economic issue. How many of us remember brown trees in the 80s and 90s? Come on. No? Yeah, we remember them because coal was coming this way and causing acid rain. I'm sorry, but we've not really hammered on Elise Stefanik enough as far as I'm concerned. She has a 19% on the League of Conservation Voters. She got a Save the River award and turned around and voted for coal dumping. She's voted to gut the EPA. The EPA protects us and protects our economic interests. This is an economic interest of ours. And I think that that's where we need to start, with our economy. We need to talk about putting scientists back on the Science Advisory Board. Folks, I'm not a scientist. So why would I care about or say I don't believe in science or believe in climate change? It's not my place to believe in it. It's my place to put people, or our place as Congress people, our elected officials, to put scientists on the Science Advisory Board and to fund the EPA, which keeps us safe and helps our economy. That's the job.
Thank you. So the incumbent, Elise Stefanik, has already raised several $100,000, has clearly entrenched herself within the community, been reelected. Why are you the person that will be able to defeat Elise Stefanik if you are to run in the main election or in the primaries? Starting with Emily.
We have an incumbent who's she has a lot of faults. Her health care bill vote, her stream protection rule, her wellness program that would allow insurance companies to buy our genetic information. We have a lot of votes that any one of us could go up against her for. Her other Achilles heel is her inaccessibility, her inability to listen, and her inability to create relationships with those of us in the local communities. That is my strength. Everywhere I go, I build relationships with people because I listen. I learn about what their needs and their values are, and I try to figure out policies that will help fulfill those visions, fulfill those needs. It's the way I have lived my life. It is the way I have lived my profession.
And that is time. Thank you.
The first time I ran for public office for Commissioner of Public Safety in Saratoga Springs, I was not favorite to win. I didn't actually think I would win. I was running against a retired state trooper. There was a tradition that actually, I think it had been 40 years since a Democrat had held the office. I went door to door. I fought hard because it's a citywide election for this particular post. And I convinced people that I was the right person to take this job. There had been a scandal with the previous Commissioner of Public Safety that had created a lot of issues, and it was just an awful time in that particular office. So I'm resilient. I think I can do the job. I'm willing to listen to people, and I'll always be there to hear what you all have to say, because that's what you deserve. You need a representative who's actually going to represent you.
Well, thank God most of you aren't Republican primary voters. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I've come here and I've stood my ground. I've espoused my beliefs, and I've told you what I think and what I believe. But the fact is, there's many of you out there that know me. I run into you at Stewart's. I've seen you around. I'm part of this community. I'm part of this district. I know everybody. I'm that blue jeans and t-shirt guy that drives around in the old pickup truck. Nobody out there is my enemy. I may disagree with you, but I'm here to listen to everybody and to represent, because at the end of the day, the end goal is having somebody compassionate enough to listen to you, but strong enough to go to Washington, D.C. and demand action.
I have been accused of being a sexist for calling Elise a little girl. And I probably deserve to be called a sexist. I think most of us, if we admit it, have some of the sexist in us, some of the racist in us. It's something, if we're decent people, we recognize in ourselves, and we struggle with it all of our lives. But Elise, I recognize her, I'm not going to say a little girl, I recognize her as a child. And it has nothing to do with her age. I see her as a child because she's a child. She thinks like a child. She has people set things up for her. She has people put their words in her mouth, and she happily repeats them. And I think recognizing her, I would go after her in that way. And I apologize if that's mean, but that's how I would do it.
Our country's in crisis right now. And what happens next November is going to affect every single person in this district, whether they vote or not. But for the very first time, the entire country is going to be paying attention to this race, and the resources are going to come this way. And I can tell you one thing that I know for sure. The thing that Republicans and Democrats agree most upon right now is that the establishment is what we're fighting. And I am the anti-establishment candidate.
As I've said before, the threats of large amounts of money are not as large as you would think. It is the consultants and the people that make money off of expensive races. The Congresswoman Stefanik can run all the ads she wants. Karl Rove can run all the ads she wants. They're not going to persuade people. What works is getting out, moving door to door, being accessible. Our campaign has done 9 open forum events. The Congresswoman hasn't done 1 real town hall. We've done 2 here in St. Lawrence County. That's part of our strategy. Our strategy is also to make her strength in her financial resources her weakness, to show that when she takes $170,000 from the insurance industry, she votes to take away health care from tens of thousands of our friends and neighbors. When she takes money from the fossil fuel industry, she votes to dump coal debris in the rivers of the United States. When she takes money from vulture capitalists like Paul Singer, she votes to engage in class warfare by supporting a cut in the estate tax that ensures that trust fund kids will never have to work a hard day in their life like every one of us here has, because they'll be able to inherit all that money that they've never worked to earn. She is disqualified for this position because she doesn't represent North Country values and she doesn't do the job the right way.
I look forward to the debate. I look forward to holding Elise Stefanik accountable for her wrong votes on this district. She votes with Washington, she votes with her party, and she votes against us. She voted to cut education, she voted to cut health care, which is a driver in our economy. She votes against the environment. She remains neutral or says nothing about immigration, does not pass or bring forward any meaningful change or legislation. She must be held accountable, and I look forward to that debate with her. The other thing I would say for me is that as an elected official and someone who worked with Republicans and Democrats and independents, I look forward to doing that in Congress. I hope to do that. I hope to travel around this district and listen to people. That is not what Elise Stefanik has done. I think we need to hold her feet to the fire. It's not just about us up here running. It's about holding Elise Stefanik to the fire. And that has to happen with you as well, and with your help as well.
Do you all see this book that I'm holding in my hand? This is my to-do book. This is a list of things that we're working on right now. There is a lot more to being a congressman than the votes you take down in D.C. And as far as I'm concerned, Elise is not doing her job because she doesn't care, because it's a lot of work to get things done. And it's a lot of work because you're always campaigning. And we're campaigning right now, but there's no reason we can't get things done right now. So I'm stone cold serious. You have an issue in a community or something that you think Elise is not working on, you let me know, and it goes in our list, because I want to start working on it now, because when we get elected, I want to be hitting the ground running. And that's what I plan on doing, and that's how I plan on beating Stefanik, by getting things done.
Thank you. So for the final question, in light of the conversations tonight and the points that have been raised, we've heard lots of similarities and differences. I'd like to give you each a minute or so to emphasize why you are unique relative to everyone else, and why people should vote for you. And that is beginning with Mr. Kim.
But first, I want to thank you all for being so attentive, and I enjoyed this process. Why I'm unique. I've lived most of my life, because I probably am the oldest here. I probably lived longer in this district than anyone else. I have had public service experience, elected public service experience, and also appointed. I've practiced law, so I've maintained my own business, and I've worked in the nonprofit sector. So I've had a variety of experiences that I think do bring me to this challenge in a way that will really, I think, provide to all the constituents of the 21st a representative who's responsive and compassionate to the needs of its residents.
What makes me unique? Look at this. I am the black sheep at the last two events. But you know what? Honestly, it's been an honor to sit on these daises with these people. We needle each other, we barb each other, we go at each other professionally. But at the end of the day, we shake hands and we smile. And that's what I bring to the table. Like I said, I'm disgusted with both parties. I am a conservative, and that is my belief, and that's what I do. But that does not mean that I look down on anybody for their beliefs, or if someone has a Bernie sticker on their car. I talk to Patrick all the time. But the fact is, I'm here to listen, I'm here to represent, and while we may disagree, we can do it politely, we can do it professionally, and I will be here always to listen to all of you.
I'm an old man, getting to be an old man, and I've lived a happy life. I really have, and I appreciate that. Didn't always seem like it was at the time, but looking back, it was a very happy life. At this point in my life, I see kids. I see the kids that go to the school, to Plattsburgh city school district. I'm on the school board. I hopefully will have some grandchildren someday, but don't tell my daughters that I said that if you happen to see them, but I really do. And I would like to work for the kids to make sure that they have a country, a world that's at least as good as the one I had, and hopefully better.
Please don't confuse my confidence with arrogance, but I'm the only one on the stage who can beat Elise Stefanik. I'm the only one who draws a very clear contrast, who has the energy, who can match her, who's quick on my feet, who has a sharp tongue and can go toe-to-toe with someone who's had the amount of coaching and breeding that she's had to get where she is. I'm like you. I'm an outsider, I'm electable, I know the issues because I live them every single day, just like everyone else in this room. And I am your candidate to go up against Elise Stefanik. And I would like to invite everyone else on this stage to back me and come work on this campaign so we can actually beat her, so we don't spend $500,000 on a primary that no one can win, because we're gonna have to go to a runoff. No one's gonna get 50% of the vote, even if there were half of the people up here running. And we're gonna spend so much money on a primary that we'll never be able to come back and get her out of office. We need to make a decision now, we need to be decisive, and we need to get Elise Stefanik out.
New York State doesn't have runoff elections. And if you're the only one that can beat Elise Stefanik, you might want to educate yourself on how the electoral process works before proclaiming yourself the best qualified candidate to do the job. I think everybody on this stage is a better candidate than Elise Stefanik, and I don't think it's our job to decide who the nominee is going to be. I think it's your job to decide who the nominee is going to be. What sets me apart is I have knocked on more doors in this district than anybody living over the last 3 years. I have had more one-on-one conversations with the voters, and I understand the electorate in a way that you only can when you've sat and listened to people's stories and understood their struggles and realized that what the consultants from the top down say about this district and what the reality on the ground is are completely disconnected. And if we continue running the same kind of campaigns and make the same mistakes, we're going to get the same result. I can't promise you that I won't make mistakes in this campaign, but I can promise you that if we do make mistakes, they're going to be new ones.
When I was in college, I lived here, and they were trying to build an incinerator. And one of the legislators turned his back on a waiting crowd of about 150 of us. At that time, I said, I'm going to run for county legislature. I did, 10 years later. I ran against an incumbent that someone said I would never win. I went to 2,800 households. I went door to door, just like Patrick is talking about. I ran on the premise that I would listen to people and I would work for them. I did that. I ran a second time unopposed. I served as a county legislator, as a public servant, and I'm running again because Elise Stefanik has turned her back on this district. I believe in the people in this district, and I want to serve them. I want to use the skills that I have to your good, to our good, to further us, the North Country, not Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. has not been fighting for our region for a very long time, and I saw it when I worked in Congress. Rural New York has been left behind. It is my job to be your voice and to amplify that voice, because we can't keep going down this trajectory. We can't keep having people leave this region, because this is a wonderful place to live. I want to be your voice down in DC. I want to speak loud and clear. I want to be the bully down in DC that's going to get things done. That's what this book is about, because we're going to start getting things done now. I want to get things done for the region, and I plan on starting today.
Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you for staying engaged with us in this democratic process. The biggest issue facing our district, as well as facing our nation, is the ever-widening wealth gap. It's destabilizing our economy. It's destabilizing our society. For the last 30 years, working-class Americans have not had a raise, while year after year, corporate profits have gone up, mergers and acquisitions have increased. This persists because the politicians in Washington put their own careers and their parties before their people. So we need someone in our district who is going to represent the economic development needs and the human needs of our district. And I have spent my entire career in economic development or in teaching. And my success has been the result of other people's success. It has been the result of listening to people at the local level, learning about their needs, their values, and I will lead in Congress by keeping it local.
Thank you. So that concludes the question and answer period, and I will turn it back over to Jess to close things up. What? Closing statements? That was basically, that was that. No, there was no 2-minute closing statements. That was the 1-minute part. So I'm going to give it to Jess, and we will wrap that up. Here you go, Jess.
Thanks. So now is the time where it's appropriate to give some applause to these candidates for us. So thank you to the candidates for participating in this discussion. Thank you to the organizers and the volunteers who made the event possible. And thank you so much to the audience, especially all of those that stuck with us for over 2 hours here. Thank you for seriously considering what these candidates had to say. Again, they are currently interviewing for one of the most important jobs anyone could hold in our country. So, as you leave, please first check for your personal belongings and take them with you. We don't want them here after you leave. And if you're not registered to vote, please make sure that you fill out a voter registration form. You can take them with you and put them in the mail, or you can fill one out and we're happy to take them to the Board of Elections for you. So let's give the candidates one more round of applause. And I hope you all have a good evening. Thank you.